Hello, everyone. One of the great nemeses in INFJ life is anxiety. Okay, there is, it seems to me, a correlation, a mental health correlation between being an INFJ and higher than average levels of anxiety. So, if we were to consider the Big Five model, what that would essentially mean is a tendency for INFJs to be what I would say moderately high in neuroticism. I wouldn't say that they're the most neurotic of the types, so they're probably not the most anxious of the types, but they're also unlikely to be the least anxious of the types. That does not mean that no INFJ exists who is low in neuroticism, who is low in anxiety. Of course, that exists. In fact, I have a name for that kind of INFJ, and that is the secure INFJ, one of the four subtypes of INFJ that I have put forward, keeping in mind that as per anti-fluidity, my work is always a flux, always in process, likely that new categories will be added over time, also that old categories such as the compliant INFJ or the solipsistic INFJ and even the spiritualized INFJ are so far equipped with descriptions that are themselves fluidly open to perpetual update, redescription, redefinition, and reinvention. This is a way of exercising NI, and I'm not saying this gratuitously, because in fact this video is going to connect the whole idea of having an NI world to reckon with when you're an NI dominant of the INFJ persuasion and anxiety. I've talked about this before in a video that I released not that long ago, in fact. So I will be using a different angle. I'll be taking a different angle on this today. Not so different as one might expect. It's perhaps better described as a deeper dive into the issue. And this is also the fruit of some of my further reflections as because usually when I release a video, it's not like the end of the story. I release it. In the very process of recording it, some thoughts are emerging. And the thoughts are emerging in a way that can't be shared spontaneously because they're kind of gestating. And often, as per, again, NI drifting, NI processing, a few days later, get new insights, eventually can release them in the video. And even in the course of this particular video right now, no doubt some new insights, new thoughts are gestating. So in the case of INFJ anxiety, I am becoming increasingly convinced, very, very increasingly convinced, very much so, that there's a deep and profound link between the extent to which an INFJ is anxious, experiencing high levels of anxiety, and the extent to which they are disaligned with their NI harmony. So when I talk about NI harmony, what I mean by this is a life on the part of the INFJ personality that is experienced and lived as an expression of their oceanic inner world. And remember, talked about the interstices, talked about the fact that external reality is regimented. The external world is not oceanic. And it shouldn't be, because if we all were in an ocean, we probably would all die eventually. So there are, again, nature does its work wisely and well. There are reasons why the world is regimented, but that does not mean that our internal worlds are regimented. In fact, if you think of the ultimate regimented mind, you're probably thinking about an ESTJ, for example, a TESI type of mind, or maybe an SITE type of mind. And surprise, surprise, often, I'm not saying always, but often, these types tend to do well in the external world and without too much questioning. There's, of course, exceptions, but often this is what we observe. Conversely, a type whose inner world is very much oceanic and very much the opposite of regimented, and in fact, a world whose health depends on not being too regimented, is going to be at odds with external reality. This is what we call alienation, this is what we call severance, this is what we call distance, haziness, disembodiment, and all the existential aspects of the INFJ condition. Now, the problem is that given that the world is what it is, the external world is regimented, it has a structure that feels and is externally imposed, so very, very unlike the structure or absent thereof of the oceanic NI world, there's going to be a premium on seeking to adapt rather than on seeking to be authentically oneself, and seeking to adapt at the price of oneself, and this is very much the topic of the infinite soul, by the way, infinite in reference to the lack of finitude. INFJ Life in the Modern World, this book that I released last year, is still very much available, helped a lot of people, so check it out at the link below if you want to know more about the video, what I'm talking about today in this video, and lots of other things. The pressure to adapt is very likely to lead us to forget a little bit about this need for NI harmony. NI harmony between the way that we lead our lives and the way that NI is always slowly unfolding within ourselves. The more I think about what Nietzsche calls the grand style, Nietzsche always loved to talk about leading lives that are aesthetic in every way. Leading lives that are in our every movement, things we do, has to follow a certain kind of harmony, a certain kind of aesthetic. I'm more convinced than ever that this is exactly the insight that he was touching as an NI dominant himself, undoubtedly. I think what he was basically saying is NI dominants should live oceanically and relate to the regimented external world by means of interstices when the moment is ripe, rather than by means of constant and strained adaptation that is blind to interstices, because there's too much of a fixated focus on adaptation at all costs and no trust in the ego's ability to authentically pick its moments of adaptation, the interstices. Moments of adaptation rather than constant and strained adaptation. Constant and strained adaptation being, the source of anxiety. Because, and this is maybe something that I will explore a bit more in the next video, because I feel like, I'm being a bit wordy in this particular video, so we can definitely explore this in the next chapter. But just by way of subtle foreshadowing, there is always, in the drive toward adaptation, the superego, the shadow of the superego looming large. And the superego is represented in the cognitive functions of the INFJ by the functions of judgment, because that's what the superego does. It judges. The id desires, the id creates, the id pushes forward, the id connects, the id attacks sometimes, but it's all impulse and desire. It's very important to have impulse and desire. The superego is all about morality, judgment, what you should do rather than what you're doing, rather than what you want to do. Okay, and the ego is trying to regulate the relationship between the id of desire and the superego of shoulds and should nots. Functions of judgment are really gonna become really, really omnipresent in an anxious INFJ who's constantly trying to adapt, as opposed to leading an oceanic life of occasional and strategic moments of adaptation, that is to say, the interstices, rather than this constant strained adaptation, which is always, I think, going to be manifested, besides anxiety, in a lot of judging function use in INFJs. And that means that an INFJ that uses a lot of the judging functions is not necessarily doing well mentally. It's not necessarily the right thing to do. But let me explore this more in the next video. Okay, give me a like if you enjoyed the video, guys. Don't forget that I've written another book on the INFJ, which is a bit of a classic now, called The Ecstatic Soul, a new look at the INFJ personality. Check the reviews. There's lots of good ones. It's helped a lot of people. And it's all about the INFJ mind and what it's like to be an INFJ. It's the deepest investigation into this topic. Don't forget as well that I have a Patreon page and that I very much depend on your kind donations. I could not do it without you. If you would like me to continue producing high quality content every day for you, please consider donating to me. The link is below to my Patreon. You get access to some really cool perks like a Discord server, bonus videos every 2-3 weeks where I do a deep dive into a topic of your choice, and other nice things. So hopefully see you there and talk to you next time. Bye-bye, guys.